This summer, delegates to the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly, including representatives of this congregation, voted to modify our bylaws to include the 7 values that form the core of our movement. Those values are justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, all bound together by love. And if you want help remembering them, just picture a jet-propelled pig carrying a big heart. This jet pig spells out the values, and the hearts represent love. That's the only way I can remember. Now, these values didn't do away with the 8 principles that congregations have cherished for years. Instead, they articulate the foundations from which those principles arise. Last year, we used each of those values as bi-monthly themes for worship, and we found that there was so much meat in them that we will spend more time this year looking at them. In July and August, this past July and August, we examined pluralism. This month and October, we'll take a deep look at generosity. Here's how the amended bylaws describe that value. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependency and mutuality. Do you hear in that statement the underpinnings of some of our principles? Because of generous spirits, we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and we seek justice, equity, and compassion in our relationships. Generosity grants the right of people to have a voice in those things that affect them and seeks peace, liberty, and justice for all. And it connects us to one another, emphasizing our interdependence. One thing I like about the new articulation of our values is that each value carries with it a covenantal statement, what we promise each other to do to uphold that value. In the case of generosity, we covenant to freely and compassionately share our time, our treasures, and our faith. Over the next 2 months, we'll be looking at generosity through a variety of lenses, talking about its many variations, sources, and outcomes, and how it might change individuals, institutions, culture, and lives. Today, I'd like to begin by examining generosity as a spiritual practice. Now, I have come to see spirituality as the sense of connection a person has with the rest of creation. Connection with what came before, what is now, and what comes after. Now, for many people, that involves connection with God, personal or otherwise, or some creative power, what has been called the ultimate mystery. For others, it is the awe that comes with feeling our place in the infinite time and space of this universe. People are more or less spiritual depending on their awareness of the connections and the effect that awareness has on their lives. Religion, as I view the word, is a path by which one can explore and enhance their spirituality. Most religions have a prescribed set of practices or disciplines designed to strengthen the spiritual connections. And one almost universal practice is generosity, sacrifice, or charity. Early Greeks practiced the libation to the gods, pouring the first drink from a cask or a bottle of wine onto the ground in sacrifice. The Hebrew Bible and the Hindu Vedas, 2 of the earliest known sacred texts, set out instructions and hymns for sacrificing animals and produce. Tzedakah, or righteous giving, is the Jewish concept of tithing. Christian scriptures are filled with references to charity. The 4th pillar of Islam is zakat, or setting aside a portion of one's income for charity. And the first paramis, or perfection, in the Buddhist tradition is generosity. Why this universal incorporation of charity into religious practice? Well, for some, charity, or sacrifice is a display of gratitude to God and sense of duty to ensure future blessings. Many early religious leaders recognized that charity made a community stronger. It strengthened the bonds between members while it ensured that those in need were cared for. Buddhists believe that generosity, or dana, reverses the ego's basic drive to absorb everything into itself. Instead of depleting resources, the continual act of giving, physically, psychologically, and spiritually, actually brings richness and resourcefulness to the practitioner. Some churches have taught a theology of abundance, often emphasizing that charity reaps rewards of a material sort to the charitable. Now, while I have trouble with this transactional sort of generosity, I recognize that it can produce good results on the receiving end of the gift, no matter its motivation. All of these concepts teach the same thing. Generosity changes us, and it changes the communities we live in. Generosity is a self-reinforcing practice. It creates abundance, not because things magically appear, but because it makes people more generous, more loving. Now, there's a reason we call things spiritual practices. We need to do them over and over again to get them right. So how do we practice generosity in a way that makes it spiritual? That is, how do we share our resources, our presence, and our faith in ways that connect us to one another and to the rest of the universe? Often, when we hear the word generosity, we think money, and so I'll start there. And more to the point, I'll start by talking about generosity towards sustaining our Unitarian Universalist community right here, right now. Think of the ways we are asked to share our resources within this community. Our annual pledges, the weekly offering, special fundraisers, all give us opportunities to practice generosity. How can we make them a spiritual practice? Well, think about our pledges. I remember once that a couple told me that the first check they write each month is their pledge to this church. For them, that does two things. It establishes their contribution not as whatever's left over, but as what they have committed up front to. And secondly, it establishes a conscious time of charity in which they can be grateful for the gifts of the community and share with it what they have. Even if our pledge is automatically paid each month, we can still make that conscious connection. We pass the plate every Sunday in a ritual of giving and sharing. So if we are mindful of generosity as a spiritual practice, each of us can participate by adding some contribution to the plate. And when we do, we can reflect on what the gifts of this church mean to each of us and what our gifts mean to it. Another aspect of generosity is that of our presence. We are a community of volunteers, whether we're talking about church governance, ministry to each other, or engagement in many things outside these walls that speak to all our values and principles. They wouldn't happen without the generous gifts of time so many of you make day in and day out. Presence to the needs of others for a soft shoulder, a warm hand, or an understanding nod is another precious gift that generosity calls us to give. The third aspect of generosity calls us to give generously of our faith. Well, what does that mean, and how do we do it? In the broadest sense, I think it means living our faith, actively working to make our principles reality. When we engage in Room in the Inn, Safe Haven, Noah, Tennessee UU's United, Pride Day, we are proclaiming our faith, sending it out into the world, sharing it with all who see and hear us. Speaking truth to power, calling out injustice, being the change we want to see in the world. All these are ways we generously share our faith. So is inviting a friend to one of our services, or a concert, or a celebration, or, and now I'll hear some shudders from some of you, talking to a complete stranger about Unitarian Universalism, being unafraid to share what our faith is and does. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first moved to Nashville, I never talked about being part of a church community with people outside of fun. I think my hesitancy came from two sources. One, I didn't want people to think I was part of what I thought they would assume was a religion akin to theirs. The other source was my lack of an elevator speech, a 2-minute description of Unitarian Universalism to succinctly introduce others to the UU movement. And it's one thing to talk with people whose missions and values resonate with ours, even though they may practice a different religion. It's another to talk to someone about Unitarianism when their worldview appears to be very different. That began to change several years ago for me when fun was in relationship with Corinthian Missionary Baptist Church. Not only did I make a dear friend there with whom I could talk, but when another member asked me what UUism was all about, and I gave what I felt even then was an evasive answer, her response was something to the effect of, "Don't feel you have to sugarcoat it. We don't all follow the strict line of our prescribed religion." From that point, I began in earnest to develop my elevator speech, so I would be prepared to answer forthrightly. By the way, that speech continues to evolve as I do. So, back to being unafraid to share what our faith is and does. The generosity of sharing our faith with others is one of the greatest gifts we can give. The idea that this religious community, this faith, saves lives is not a pipe dream. It's real. And it's the best gift you can give someone in need of a lifeline. Remember, generosity is a practice. We work at it until we get it right, and then we work some more. Now let me tie all this together. Spirituality is our sense of connection with the rest of creation. It is a connection with the past and future, as well as with what is here and now. Generosity brings us in touch with that spirituality. It reminds us of what we have been given by all who came before us, those who shared our resources and their presence and their faith with us. And it is our opportunity to leave a legacy to those who will follow. May it be so. May we make it so by our living.